Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the All In Crypto podcast. I am your host, All In, and today I am very excited to have Bill Laboon, the head of grants and education at the Web3 Foundation, and also an author of a couple of books related to cryptography. One of them, a bit of a sci-fi, near-futuristic book called Strength in Numbers, which is about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and of course, Monero. So welcome on board, Bill. How are you?
Thanks. Yeah, doing great. And it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you back on. Really enjoyed our chat last time. And I think when I listened to Gavin Wood's keynotes at Decoded, you were the first person that popped into my head. I said, I've really got to reach out and get you back on the show to maybe talk a little bit about what was proposed in those keynotes. But before we do that, I'd maybe kind of like to dive in a little bit to the current state of Polkadot, because things have been going unbelievably well by all metrics. And if we could maybe start with just talking generally about where Polkadot's currently at and how things have been going. Now, that's probably quite a lot to summarize, but let's just maybe start with Polkadot. Right now, I believe we have around about 52 parachains, is it?
48.
48 parachains. Okay, so I was four off then. Yes. But they've all been going swimmingly. And as far as Polkadot's concerned, it's operating exactly as it should be.
Yeah, Polkadot has been doing well. As you mentioned, we have had no problems on the Polkadot side of things. All of the parachains are operating as they should right now. You may have heard, we had some issues with Kusama. But this is what Kusama is for, right? So Kusama, for those who aren't aware, is our canary network where new features are pushed out, and we sort of push the boundaries to see what's possible and see where things might fail. And Polkadot itself, we've had OpenGov in operation there for quite a few months now. We have been onboarding new parachains pretty regularly. Things are going well. And as you mentioned, we're looking to propose a couple of new improvements to the system to make it even better.
Yeah, more nimble, I think, was
exactly
how Gavin Wood described it, which I absolutely love. And you mentioned OpenGov there. OpenGov's kind of I think as the crypto space, as the kind of blockchain space, the distributed ledger space evolves, governance becomes more and more of an important thing. And can we maybe go back a little bit and actually talk about OpenGov, which is what these proposals will essentially pass through and be voted on, and give a kind of overview of that?
Sure. Yeah. So let me just step back for a second, if you don't mind, and I'll talk about sort of the general philosophy of governance in Polkadot. Early governance systems really were very off-chain, right? I mean, you can think of Bitcoin governance. It's really people discussing off-chain about what kind of soft forks would occur. Same with Bitcoin, although those tend to be hard forks. The idea behind Polkadot's governance was always that the dot holders would be in charge of any changes to the system, and this is really baked in at a fundamental level to the chain. So most blockchains, how they work is, the rules for that blockchain are built into the code. So if you're running a Bitcoin node, for instance, the rules for that blockchain are built into the Bitcoin node software. And if there's an upgrade, well, you got to get some new software. The idea behind Polkadot is that the rules for the blockchain, what we call the runtime, are actually embedded in the chain itself. So any node that's following that will automatically get upgraded. You don't need to upgrade your software, because if you're following the chain and new code comes out or some new parameter comes out, you have to follow it. If you want to keep following the chain, you need to follow the rules. And so we wanted to make sure that this was not something that that Parity or Web3 Foundation or any individual entity would have control over, but rather only the dot holders. So every time there is a change on Polkadot, and this goes from the very early days, it originally launched without that, but within I can't remember the exact amount of time, about 2 months, we released it to once we made sure everything was up and running. Everything was in control of the dot holders and has been ever since. So under the original Gov1 system, this went really well, but there were a few things about it that we thought could be improved. So there were some what we call first-class citizens. There was a council that was elected and voted. There was a technical committee which had very minimal powers. They could just reduce the amount of time that you could vote on a referendum. But also we saw that as an issue, right? That's still a centralized, single entities that have extra power than ordinary dot holders. And also you were really restricted in how many referenda, how many things you could vote on at once. Generally, it was one thing at a time, and that was, very slow. So the idea behind OpenGov was to remove all of anything that would make an account have more power than another. So now, one dot is one dot is one dot for everyone. There is no technical committee, there is no council, etc. And we have various tracks. These tracks you can think of as like topics, right, that you can vote on, anywhere from a really powerful one like root that can do pretty much anything, all the way down to small tip, which allows you to send up to 10 dot as a tip to someone, and it can be voted on. And obviously, to get something passed via root is going to be much more difficult and require a lot more voting power than something for a small tip. So OpenGov has been, I would say, a real success. We have seen a lot of different proposals. We've also learned a lot. Again, Kusama we have as a canary network, and so we launched OpenGov on that earlier last year. So we learned a lot about kinds of parameters to set and etc. So we've been watching OpenGov. There's been a lot of participation. Every referendum we see hundreds of accounts voting. We see millions of dot voting on things. So it's been there's a podcast all about Polkadot governance called AAG, Attempts at Governance, by the Kusamarian. So what we've seen actually is I think one of the sort of most dynamic governance systems out there, right? Because we have put a lot of power into the hands of users. And so one thing I just want to mention about all of our governance systems, these are not like many other governance systems where you're basically asking someone to do something. If something passes in governance, the runtime makes it happen. If you vote to upgrade the software and the people vote for it, it happens automatically. There's no human intervention necessary, right? Which I think is really sort of the core goal of crypto, right? And blockchain is that you can have things happen and you don't need to trust anything other than the system, right, to make sure that it will happen.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons we love Polkadot is because I don't know if it's fair to say this, but it's kind of like the predecessor to Bitcoin, except for it's really expanded on the kind of, if you believe in the narrative of Satoshi Nakamoto, if you think that story is the accurate origins of everything, which is not what we're here to debate, then Polkadot really has expanded on the capabilities of Bitcoin, but at its core held the philosophies that it was built for, and that is to put the power back into your hands, the users of the network's hands. And I think I'm really glad that we segued into OpenGov because, of course, the proposals that were put forward by Gavin Wood are going to pass through this, and you guys, your dot holders, are going to be the ultimate deciders of whether this goes forward or not. So governance and OpenGov, this is the first time I think really in this kind of a form in history where people have had the power given back to them for these systems. I'm sure there are maybe similarities in certain things unrelated to cryptography and distributed ledger technologies, but governance is a really powerful thing, and I'm very glad that we segued into that, and people have got a kind of understanding of that. So we have seen really good participation rate. How long has OpenGov been going for roughly now?
Several months. I don't have the exact date that it went live. Sometime in June. Yep. So it's what's now July, August, September. Yeah, about 3 months on Polkadot, but it's been live on Kusama since it was either late November or early December of last year. So we've actually seen quite a few referenda between Kusama and Polkadot coming through.
Brilliant. And actually, just to extend on that topic, Polkadot has a treasury. Mm-hmm. And that treasury is there to basically In fact, I'll maybe let you answer that. What is the Polkadot Treasury all about? Because, of course, you can vote on where the Treasury's resources are allocated through OpenGov. So could we get a bit of an introduction to the Polkadot Treasury?
Sure. So the Treasury is also a part of the system. Again, it's not like, I own the keys to the Treasury. It's an account that is controlled by the system that is funded in a variety of ways. So for instance, if a validator gets slashed, that is, they do something bad and they get some DOT taken away as a punishment, it goes to the Treasury. Some staking inefficiencies, which might take a while to go into what that exactly means, go into the Treasury. A portion of transaction fees when you issue a transaction, issue an extrinsic, do something on the Polkadot relay chain. A percentage of that goes to the Treasury. So the Treasury, slowly builds up with DOT, and then it's actually up to users to make Treasury proposals that we should, send DOT to people, to teams to do things, right? So some of these, and this can be anything. There's actually like a whole variety, right, of things. So like things like RPC endpoints. One thing that we saw a problem with a lot of systems is that people running nodes, it tends to get very centralized. I'm not going to. My goal isn't to name any ecosystems, right? But
let's not start a battle. Yeah, let's not start a war.
That's not my goal, but it's a problem, right? That we've seen, right? We don't want to have one company that has all the nodes that you can interact with the system for. So one thing that these Treasury proposals pay for is what is essentially a public good, right? Running these nodes to different teams. So we actually have a goal. We haven't quite reached it, but it is our goal that less than 2% of requests should ever go to any single RPC endpoint provider, like any single node provider. So we want at least 50 out there and very well spread out. Again, we haven't quite reached that, but that's our stated goal, what we're going for. Wallets. Right, like wallets, often can be considered a public good. Marketing events, a lot of this stuff, and all of this can be voted on. Infrastructure, programming. There's right now. I think as of this morning, there's something like 18 or 19 different Treasury proposals on Polkadot, right, for different projects. And this doesn't even count bounties, which are kind of like a special Treasury proposal, and there are 7 of those. So. So anyways, the point of the Treasury is that we should spend this DOT, right? This DOT should be used for things. There's actually something people sometimes like yell at me on Twitter and they say like, all right, Polkadot is inflationary. There's no burning mechanism, and I say no, actually there is, right? Treasury, if you don't spend DOT from the Treasury, it gets burned, and this happens on a regular cycle of 28 days, right? So you are incentivized to spend this DOT on things, right, that are going to help improve the ecosystem. And again, everything is controlled by the DOT holders, right? And so, there's actually been, quite a few cases where I've said, hey, I think this is a really important project. I think people should fund it. And, DOT holders disagreed with me, right? And vice versa, right? You can see, my account is Bill, on Kusama and Polkadot. You can certainly, anyone can look up and see what I've argued for and against and what the community has thought, which, sometimes it's a little annoying personally that people don't, disagree with me, but I think this shows how decentralized it is, right? And that different people have different agreements on what we should be spending the DOT Treasury on. And so, so this is the Treasury in a nutshell, right? Entirely DOT holder controlled of where DOT goes to for different projects to help build the ecosystem.
Yeah, again, Treasury, something I think that people often miss out in. It's a really interesting concept, and as a DOT holder, you have rights, and it's almost like you have a whole list of things that you can do and partake in, and being a part of the DOT ecosystem, you really get your kind of sovereignty in many areas given back to you. And this is one reason we're such a fan, Treasury, OpenGov, big reasons actually, of Polkadot. So really glad that we segued into that, because now we know a little bit about how the OpenGov system works. And let's maybe move on to some of the potential changes in the proposal that was actually put forward by Gavin Wood at Decoded 2023, because I think this has some people. A lot of people don't like change. I just want to reiterate that this change isn't in stone yet. It is a proposal. It's not an enforced thing, or just because Gavin, the founder, has came up with it, doesn't mean it's a guarantee to happen. Ultimately, it's for you guys to vote upon. But let's maybe start with actually what the proposal for a more nimble future for Polkadot actually is. And there's quite a lot to it, so we can maybe break it down if we need to.
Yeah, there's really a lot of different parts to it, and if you're really interested in it, so we have something called the Polkadot Technical Fellowship. Maybe we can put links to it on here, and we have all of these listed in much more explicitly, right? So everything is done in public. All the meeting notes for these are public. The Polkadot Technical Fellowship of potential changes, and as you mentioned, this has to be voted on by dot holders. And we've seen in the past, again, a lot of times people will make a proposal of some kind, a referendum, and it does get voted down by the dot holders. So yeah, Polkadot Decoded 2023. So Gavin Wood, one of the founders of Polkadot, laid out some potential proposals for how Polkadot would change. So I think we need to step back again, right? I'm an educator. I was going to say, all right, well, let's understand the basics first, and then we'll see how it changes. So really what the Polkadot relay chain is, it's kind of like a multi-core computer, okay? And what it's generally computing is what we call the state transitions of the parachains, right? So really what the Polkadot, the Polkadot relay chain, and then there are parachains, right, that connect to the relay chain. Really what it's doing, it's verifying that these are valid transitions, right? That this is something, if I have a bill chain and I have 7 bill coins, and I set up at the beginning that, I can't send more bill coins than I have to someone. I can't have a negative balance. And I try to send someone 9 bill coins and I have 7, right? The relay chain is going to say, no, that's not a valid block, and, look for another one. But so the idea behind a lot of these new concepts is basically, this is a really restrictive way of looking at things, right? So just if you think about, I think, I'm a bit older. I think when I was a kid, a video game system, I had a video game system, and I had a camcorder, right? A big camcorder if I wanted to do videos, and I had a camera if I wanted to do photos. And, now I have an iPhone, and it does all of that stuff, right? Because they're all really abstractions of certain concepts, right? And I think this is something computing is really good at, right? I used to be a software engineering professor, and that's all just abstractions, right? It's you're abstracting, a bunch of ones and zeros into a Zoom call or, a video game or a blockchain or whatever. So really what a lot of these new ideas are abstracting away from just this idea of parachain and relay chain. If we think of the relay chain as a computer, all right, well, that allows us actually to do a lot more stuff, right? So you can still handle parachains, right? Because that's just one concept. But you also could have essentially smart contracts running directly against the relay chain, right? Because it's just another way it's just another thing to compute, right? You could have more powerful, for lack of a better word, more computationally intensive parachains, right? You could have something that requires a lot more computing power or variable amounts of computing power. Instead of just, basically right now, if you have a lease, you have the amount of computing power necessary for doing, one parachain. But if you have, some application that sometimes requires a lot of computing power or storage or whatever, and other times requires a little bit, we don't really have a way at this moment for handling that. So there's a couple of different things that we're doing here, right? That have been proposed. So one is this idea of Coretime. So if we think of the processing power as cores, so just you may have heard, if you bought a computer, oh, that's a 2-core, multi-core machine, that's a 4-core machine. A core is just basically a baby CPU inside your bigger CPU. And so we have so many CPUs, essentially, so many cores that can handle parachains. But one do we need to have them for such a long period, right? So right now, virtually every parachain, in fact, every parachain that has won a slot, as far as I know, has gotten the entire 2-year parachain lease. And that's right. So that's a long period of time, right? And especially it's hard to do like a very small weekend project and say, okay, well now I've got to get a 2-year setup to see if it works. So this is one thing, right? It's changing the time, and this is core time. So basically, you can still buy bulk core time, essentially by the month, but you also can have it on demand. So you can say, hey, I just I want to try this, or I just want to buy essentially a little bit of this core time. And there's actually will be auctions for real-time auctions. It kind of reminds me of like how auctions work for ads. When you see ads, like behind the scenes, there's a bit of an auction taking place before that actually gets shown to you. So this is the core time. There's also something called core jam, which would allow. I'm actually not sure if it means jam like dancing, or jam like I guess we would say jelly in American, marmalade or whatever.
Peanut butter and jelly, yeah. Strawberry, or, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, which would allow you to do things other, more abstract things, right? So not just parachains, but also have essentially the equivalent of smart contracts or app chains, more specific things. So there's also finally the last part of this is agile scheduling. Which is that you can have like one entity that could use more or less computational power at a time, because sometimes you will need that, right? We see that on certain chains, right? So what happens? We've seen all kinds of chains, right? When something popular occurs, and all of a sudden, all right, well now whatever, this application is taking up all the every single block, and so there's no room for others. With agile scheduling, we could say, okay, well, we'll allow that for a certain period of time. They can just buy more time on the relay chain, more cores, they can do more things. And then once the, whatever this fad is dies down a bit, then they won't use as much. So again, a lot of these proposals are really just, being more flexible, more abstract, allowing you to do different things than just sort of the standard parachain model that we have today.
Yeah, and you know what? Initially, when I first heard of it, my main concern is, which we can come on to, but I want to kind of recap on quite a bit of what you've said there, was what happens to the existing parachains, which we can come on to because there's a plan for that. But initially, when I heard it, I was a little bit sort of, change is always something you need to get used to, whether it's for the better or the worst. But now I'm very sold on what could be a new future for Polkadot, because if you imagine Polkadot as a kind of supercomputer with these cores, right now as it currently sits, and feel free to jump in at any point here, Bill, you've got parachains which take up, one parachain is one core essentially. Mm-hmm. So right now we've got 48 of those, but not all of those cores need the same amount of power, or perhaps the same amount of time, or perhaps somebody that wants to use one of those cores is completely priced out of the market because of the slot auction model. It's not practical for somebody. I think Gavin Wood, and I'm not sure if you're a tinkerer, I'd imagine a little bit of that.
Yeah.
It's not practical for somebody that just wants to tinker around, and we can factor in Kusama to that if they wanted to do that. But this new model would essentially make Polkadot exactly what was, or maybe set out for it, and that is more nimble. So people will be able to have a way lower barrier to entry in order to get into Polkadot, I believe. They'll be able to pick and choose just how long they want to do that for and what kind of power they need. So I think right now with the cores, could a parachain, and are we still going to call parachains, or what's the terminology that we may move on to now?
So as far as I know, there's been no talk about changing the name Parachains.
Okay.
Because it still is a very important part of Polkadot, right?
Yes.
The idea of these you essentially these parachains, right? These parallelized blockchains, right? The very specific thing. There's no no attempt at like redefining that term.
Okay.
I don't think. Now there will be other kinds of parachains, right? Like pay-as-you-go parachains that may not have these lease slots, but they're still, still going to be parachains.
Which is that similar to the Parathread model that was because what's happened there? I mean, maybe I should just start off by finishing on this one point before we jump into a whole other point of has anything changed on the Parathread side of things and what that vision would have looked like. But could a parachain, for example, let's pick on Moonbeam. Let's say that the users are going through the roof. They really need more compute. They need more power. Could they essentially have two of those cores now all of a sudden? Because it's up to them, really, isn't it? Now,
yes, exactly. If they're willing to pay the dot for it, then they can have additional computing power that can be done at the same time. Right, so that you could have multiple cores because they require some more time, computational resources essentially in order to continue onwards.
And on the other end of that, can a core be split up into multiple? Could essentially a parachain or whatever we call the smaller versions of these essentially split up a core and that resource be used? Because we mentioned the auction and how it would be sold.
Yeah, so that's the eventual goal. I'm actually not familiar with the code 100% right now. So sadly, as I do more management than I used to, so I can't always look at all the code. So that may come in a little bit later. But yes, this is idea, right, is part of this. It's sort of the antithesis, right? Is that sometimes you will be able, you may not have a lot happening on your parachain or your whatever you're running, right? Your entity, and you only run for a certain period, a certain amount of time, and you essentially share that core. So again, this sounds kind of wow, exotic. But this is how your computer works too, right? And you may have a 2-core CPU, but you may be running 20 applications, right? You've got mail in the background, and we're doing Zoom, and you've got a web browser, and I don't know, WhatsApp, right? But really, what's happening is when they need, they can swap in and out, right? So one will run for a little bit, then another will run, then another will run. So again, we see Polkadot, one of the phrases that Gav used was, ubiquitous computer, right? And we can see really there is a very much a one-to-one analogy with the computer here. It's just a huge decentralized computer. So a lot of what it does is stuff you would learn in Computer Science 101, just in a decentralized, distributed manner.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You can see there are lots of. It's why I was so eager to get you on the show, because there are lots of potential moving parts to it, but actually it's quite simple, I think, to understand the overall concept of really what's going on here. And you likening it to a ubiquitous computer makes a lot of sense, I think, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I mean, Polkadot was first really planned in 2016 with the release of the Polkadot paper, and launched in 2020, right? It's 4 years of development process. And then with the RFC actually for Coretime to move to this, it says that this should be done. Software engineers are always a little bit optimistic, but within 3 months after we decide on parameters for it. So it really is it's not some crazy redesign. A lot of this is just abstracting what we already have just to be a little bit more powerful once we realized what we had. Because I think that's another thing we talked about, being agile and flexible. Polkadot has always been about that. I think everyone knew in the early days, hey, we don't know what is going to be the blockchain features that we're going to have in 5 years, right? Or 10 years or 15 or 20 or 30. And so it was really designed for this, right? It was designed to update. It was designed to upgrade. And we've seen lots of different runtime upgrades with Polkadot already, adding new features and changing parameters and things. And I'd say this is really just an extension of that basic philosophy.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And as someone that's been in the space like yourself for quite a while, we've actually seen a lot of blockchains come to their demise as a result of not doing that, not being nimble enough to, for whatever reason, maybe it's because of how the governance is set up, or could be a few other reasons. But I love the fact that Polkadot is essentially looking at the state of things and saying, okay, well, this is going to benefit the Polkadot itself and the users, the developers, and everyone that's involved. And I do think it's a really good way of looking at it. It's not actually as drastic as I think people initially took it to be. It is more about becoming more nimble, becoming more inclusive, and facilitating more of what Polkadot's absolutely amazing at. And I think that's brilliant. So in the sort of Parachain slot model, there was the design for Parathreads. Mm-hmm. So is this model, if this proposal gets through, now going to completely shift? Is there anything specific with Parathreads, or is that something that I suppose you won't really need them, because Parathreads are kind of an embodiment of being able to rent a smaller, it's kind of a similar concept.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is really, so the concept of Parathreads, just for people who hadn't followed, were parachains that did not have to stay connected to the relay chain, because they could buy very small amounts of processing power, essentially, by the block. But these pay-as-you-go parachains essentially take the place of Parathreads. So I've actually, I always thought it was interesting because, parathread actually can mean two different things in Polkadot, because, any parachain starts life as a parathread, and it becomes a parachain, but it's still a parathread entity. So I've always thought this, this phrasing was a little bit, sometimes a bit confusing. But yeah, so if you've heard about parathreads, that basically gets subsumed under the concept of, pay-as-you-go parachain. And this all goes back to, right, this generalized abstraction. You can have, the same parachain, the same kind of object, and what can it do, right? It can lease relay chain time, in a big chunk, right, by the month, or it could get it, in smaller increments and auction for it. It could buy it from other people. So this is another thing I'd be very curious to see, right? One parachain has more computing power than it needs, right? And does the market evolve, right, that they can sell some of this extra, excess computing time to others? So we're going to see, I think, a lot of evolution and interesting stuff happen with that. But yes, to answer your question, parathreads, as a concept, really getting subsumed under this idea of pay-as-you-go parachains.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what a free market for sort of Coretime looks like. I'm assuming that there'll be a kind of center point where you can go and get Coretime directly from, but there'll also be secondary markets. So, for example, if somebody that has a core wants to rent some of that out, I don't know, are there any plans on building almost like a DEX for that? I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, so I don't. We are building a Coretime parachain that will allow you to get this directly. I don't think that there are any plans that I know of to build this by people at parity. But of course, these will be just, communicatable and transmissible via XCM. So it would be something that, a third party, could develop and put together.
Yeah, really interesting to see how that all unfolds. So what do you think about developers with this proposed chain? We often track GitHub, and Polkadot is always well and truly right along with Kusama, right at the top of development activity in regards to blockchain generally. I think it's only second to Ethereum, I believe. That's how well it's doing. What do you think this proposed change, if approved by the dot holders, will do for developers? Do you think you're going to see a lot more developers, because they now will be able to, coming on board and interacting with the Polkadot space? How do you think that's going to look?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to predict the future, but it certainly, I think, makes life easier for developers, right? And personally, I see, especially in blockchain, that this is really where this is what gets people interested in blockchain is, like playing around with something on the weekend, deploying it, seeing what happens, and then they get hooked, right? They go to a hackathon or whatever. So I see this as being really a great way for people to test out Polkadot and try using it without all of the extra work of putting together a parachain, which is pretty significant, right? A parachain is an L1 blockchain. You need to get explorers. You need, to get RPC endpoints. You need to have collators. You need to, get a slot, which can be, you might have to gather up a lot of DOT to do that. So I think what we're going to see is a lot more developers interested because it'll be easier to try out, right? There's a lot lower cost, right? So like right now, I try not to say anything bad about other ecosystems, but I'll say something good, right? Like Ethereum is a great ecosystem if you're just looking to, hey, I want to put together some Solidity code and put it up on a test net, and I can go to Remix and do that instantly. You could do the same thing on some of the parachains, like Moonbeam, as you mentioned, do something similar. But doing it on Polkadot itself and developing something that interacts directly with the relay chain is still a bit of a difficult process. It's still rather technically cumbersome. And so I think anything that we can do to make that easier is going to have more people try it out. And some percentage of those people will stay and build even more new and interesting things, or even the thing they build on the weekend might be very useful. So I think anything we can do to make life easier for developers is going to bring more developers on. And this is one thing, right? But just so this really is a key point for Polkadot. Is that one of the reasons you see so many developers is I think that we are doing so much work to try to bring developers into the ecosystem and make it easy for them. We're improving our documentation. I'm very proud of the Polkadot wiki. I issued the first commit for it in 2019, and now it's like 350 pages or something like that. Of just anything you'd want to know about, like the substrate. The developer relations team at Parity has been working on that. We have this Ink team for developing Ink smart contracts. One of the reasons we have so many developers is that's really a focus for us, is making life easy for developers and letting them try things and do cool things, and making it as easy for them to do those cool things as possible.
Yeah, I think developers really are the kind of heart, if you will, or they're a very important component of any ecosystem, and making life easy for them, I think is key. Just like the other side of that is also users of Polkadot and its ecosystem. I think making it easy for them, I think in order for mass adoption of anything, it's got to be easy, right? My grandparents, when I set them up with a MetaMask, they were looking around the room as if there was a poltergeist or something in there with us. So like I say, I was initially a little bit unsure about everything. And then as I really looked through it and it got a lot more simple and started to all click together, I thought, wow, this is a proposal that I'll certainly get behind. And could we talk a little bit about what you envision happening for existing parachains? So right now, parachains have 2-year slot auctions. I think all parachains have the 2-year slot auction. That's a standard thing as it currently sits. Actually, I think is it just under or over 100 days time, could even be less than that at this point. It would have been 2 years and since some of the initial parachains that we had launched. Amazing.
So actually it's approximately 2 years. I think it's 96 weeks. So yes. That you get a lease. So we'll actually see the first group of 5 parachains. Their leases will be ending late October, 24th, 26th, something like that. So they the original auctions were in November of 2021, and they onboarded in December, right before Christmas 2021. So almost
unbelievable.
2 years.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like that. It literally feels like a month or so ago that was taking place. So I'm very interested to see how Parachain, what the kind of I think the question I'm really trying to ask you is, what do you think happens with already existing parachains? Are there going to be special parameters set up for them that have perhaps already had an agreed time period that they'd be able to run for, or what kind of happens here?
Yeah, I mean, something that I went to sort of say before I go into this is there has been a lot of interaction and discussions with Parachains, right? So this isn't hey, we're just going to throw some proposal up and let's hope everyone likes it. There's been a lot of discussions, and one of the things is that there would be some sort of transitional period, right? That Polkadot would respect these parachain leases, right? And so the specifics, right? Obviously, the final code hasn't been written yet, but the general idea is that in this transitional period, that the initial parachain leases would still be respected, right? By the system. This particular parathread ID has an allocation of this much core time for until their lease would have ended. So eventually, though, that will go away, right? So the idea is, but though this is a transitional period, it's not like anyone who bought a parachain lease slot is out of luck, and they just wasted their locking up their DOT. But rather, there will be a transitional period toward this. So because we're still doing parachain auctions, so this is going to be a multi-year process before this totally transitions over.
Yeah, that was going to actually be the very next question that I asked you. I'm really glad you answered it there. Was are parachain auctions still taking place? And I suppose this has to be voted on before any kind of a halting or an actual inaction plan is taken place.
Right. And again, so actually Nodal just won the most recent parachain lease auction as of that was yesterday, I think. So so parachain auctions are still going on, and the next one starts later this week, the 30th, I think. So this still is continuing, but it eventually will go away.
Yeah. And I mean, I follow all the parachains very closely. I'm always excited about the new ones that are coming up and what they're doing. It really is amazing just how much growth we've seen with the individual parachains. In regards to pretty much every metric you can weigh a blockchain up by, developer activity, users, transactions, and partnerships. It's amazing actually how much of the DOT ecosystem is partnered with some behemoths of institutions and things like this that are obviously very, I was looking into Kilt and Deloitte. I've actually got a family member that works for Deloitte. So I was, and they're always asking me about crypto. And I said, oh, well, this is, there's some sort of a collaboration going on there. So now that we've spoken about all of this, what's the kind of, right now you have to pay is not the right word, but you have to use DOT to secure an auction. Is that going to be the same thing for core time and sort of space, if you will?
So essentially no. So the idea of locking DOT up for a significant amount of time is that is likely going to change, but rather that core time will actually be paid for, right? So right now you don't again like as you mentioned, pay is a bad word, right? Really, you are locking DOT up for a significant amount of time in order to get a lease, a parachain a slot lease. However, with Coretime, we're going to see some form of paying, burning. I think that the specifics are still being argued with, but it's not going to be like lock your DOT up for a long period of time, but rather actually using your DOT in exchange for Coretime.
Yeah. That's
so again, with parachain leases, there'll be some sort, because these ongoing leases, there'll be some exceptions to that, though.
Yeah, like I say, I'm just very interested to watch, the progression. I'm very interested to watch the run up to the voting. Very interested to watch Polkadot right now, where it's at, and how just massively it's growing in arms and legs, and it has been for a long time now. So what would you? And it's probably very hard to estimate this. What would be the sort of timing that this stuff, if voted upon, how long? When is all this getting voted upon? What does that kind of a timeline look like? Yeah,
so as always, we try not to say any sort of specific timelines, because we want to see how. Yeah, it takes as long as it takes. However, like I said, So in the initial RFC1 for Coretime, Gav had mentioned that this should be something that we can put together within 3 months after we determine the parameters. Now, after that happens, obviously it's going to go to a test net. So likely, so we have several test nets like Rococo that this is used for. Then there's Kusama, our canary network. And usually, so let's add all this time together, right? So, 3 months development time, and then being deployed to a test net. And then assuming everything works fine on a test net, generally at least 3 months on Kusama. OpenGov actually was more like 5 or 6 months because when we first deployed OpenGov, we actually saw a few issues with Kusama. Nothing major, but changing some parameters, like old governance proxies didn't work with the new governance system, so we had to modify things. So there's always these minor things, right, that may not be seen before it gets deployed. So at least another 3 months on Kusama. So again, I don't want to make any like promises, so please don't take it as that. Probably not this year, but sometime next year it'll actually be on Polkadot mainnet. But if you're interested in trying it out, then it will certainly much earlier than that be on testnets, be on Kusama. So you'll be able to start seeing things happen. It's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Kusama myself. So I love seeing all the new features come out and trying them out before they head on to mainnet.
Yeah, I'm very interested in sort of seeing all that as well unfold on Kusama before things come full circle. And it is very hard to give any kind of a timeline, I think. So it's hard to give timelines generally, but in the kind of crypto space, timelines are something that, there's often, who knows what could come up in terms of now and then.
I mean, I think anytime you're trying to do something that's really new and really exciting and pushing the boundaries, it's hard to say, right? If I was making another, when I used to be a Ruby on Rails developer, and I think of all right, if I'm just making some other Ruby on Rails app that does, the classic CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Okay, I could tell you essentially it's going to take this long, depending on these features. But when you're doing something that's brand new, that nobody's tried before, you're doing it in a decentralized environment, right? Then both the development environment is very decentralized, right? We have a lot of people, especially with the new Polkadot Fellowship, working together, as well as a decentralized system. You're pushing the boundaries, and so we really don't think it's possible to give a specific deadline.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Polkadot Fellowship. Could we maybe explore? What is the Polkadot Fellowship?
Sure. So the Polkadot Fellowship. So remember I mentioned there used to be a technical committee in Gov1.
Yes.
And the technical committee was any team who had developed a runtime or Polkadot host, the node software, could join the fellowship, and they could do basically all they could do was limit reduce or lengthen the amount of time of a referendum. So the Polkadot Technical Fellowship is a much more decentralized version of that also has relatively limited powers. And so there are, I think, 45 members of the Polkadot Fellowship. They vote each other in of people who really understand Substrate and Polkadot. It's a ranking system, so you can join as rank 1 and go all the way up to rank 9, although nobody is up to that level. I think Gavin Wood is rank 6.
Wow.
So you can imagine, so rank, and they can then vote on something called a whitelisted proposal. Again, this is they help develop. Well, actually, let me step back for a second. Their main goal is to help the growth of the ecosystem. They provide, they develop the core software. They provide advice and information and suggestions on the future of the network. There are meetings. They're open to listening for the public. There's a Matrix channel where you can watch them chat if you're interested. There's a public GitHub repo. All of this stuff is public. Their only real power, though, is that one of the tracks I mentioned in OpenGov is called whitelisted. And whitelisted still requires majority of dot holders to vote on and everything, but things can happen more quickly if the Polkadot Fellowship whitelisted. So basically, they vote and give their stamp of approval. And then any referendum can get passed a little bit more quickly. on this whitelisted track. So again, anyone also could do this on the root track if they have the exact same powers. The whitelisted track just allows it to get done more quickly. So the Polkadot Technical Fellowship, they're the ones who are really providing the technical expertise for the system, right? The people that really understand it, and doing so, in a very decentralized way. They're always looking for new members. So if you're interested and really have been contributing to Substrate and Polkadot, and would like to join their August ranks, maybe we can put a link for more details on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have quite a few links in the description, I believe, because we covered quite a lot. We covered all these moving parts of Polkadot, and there's still quite a lot that we have missed out. And we've also gone over what was proposed by Gavin Wood at Decoded. Bill, as someone that's a big fan of Polkadot, I would really love to ask you. Right now, there's currently 48 cores, Parachains at the moment. What do you think Polkadot's capabilities are moving forwards in regards to that? How many cores do you think Polkadot can get up to? And obviously now that we're breaking potentially those cores down into different things and still some of the same things, what do you think the future of Polkadot looks like in regards to that? Are we going to have thousands of cores? Or is there a limit? Is there? Yeah. No. So under the current system, right, that we have right now, so without any of these changes, we've run some estimates and some benchmarks that show that we can handle like a few hundred. With the changes that are being made, and especially with an increase in the number of validators on Polkadot, which is something that we've been we already see on Kusama. There are 1,000 validators. There are 297 on Polkadot. We think we can get up to at least 1,000, if not more, cores. And that's directly on the relay chain. So something that I think is really interesting is that these other these parachains or other entities, right, that can be like running on Polkadot, they can have their own L2s, right? So you could have like Moonbeam, you could be running an L2 on Moonbeam, right? Because it's the same thing as Ethereum, right? You have the same smart contracts. You can run an L2 on that. And so what this means, like, you can just exponentiate outward, right? So that you can have whatever, like n parachains, but each of those perhaps, or some subset of those, have their own L2s or their own app chains that are like specific to those, their own rollups, etc. So you really, like, at some point, depending on your security assumptions, you have essentially infinite transactions per second, right? Again, not really infinite, but the numbers get very big very quickly. So we can see, we've always talked about having 1 million transactions per second. Now the definition of transaction in Polkadot is always a little bit odd, because a transaction can be something very, very small or something very big. We really see lots of room for growth for Polkadot, even if we don't have a specific upper bound on it right now. Yeah, absolute music to my ears. I'm not only am I excited with where Polkadot currently is, looking forward to the future. With any kind of new technology that comes around, if it is going to find its place in the world, where the crypto space is generally, where things like Polkadot are right now in comparison with where they could be, I think is a very, very exciting prospect. And you mentioned something right at the start of the video, the interview, sorry. And do you ever think we will see smart contracts directly off of the relay chain?
Yeah, so they probably won't be called smart contracts.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but something very, very similar to that, being able to run Inc, WebAssembly, RISC-V code directly off the relay chain. Yeah, so this is just, a smart contract is just code, right?
Yes.
And the whole point, or I shouldn't say the whole point, but a big part of these changes is that you will be able to run code, right? You'll be able to run more anything you want off the relay chain. So be using the relay chain. So this is something else I think would be helpful for developers, right? You don't have to come up with all of the extra heavyweightness, right? The heavy weight of a parachain, right? You can have, these small entities, right? Essentially smart contracts run. There's actually Basti, who's one of the core developers, has a proof of concept for this. I can send over the GitHub. If you're not techie, I warn you, it'll be kind of hard to follow because it was written by a core substrate engineer to show off a new feature. But like this capability does and can and does exist.
Wow, I think we've covered so much. And it's a lot for people to digest. But again, I really want to emphasize it's actually a lot more simple at its heart of an idea than I think people initially anticipated it to do. And I'm all for it. I think it's going to make for a far more inclusive, vibrant, and elaborate sort of ecosystem all around. So, and I may know your answer here, and maybe you don't want to share it. Are you for or against the proposal as it currently sits?
No, I can say I'm happy to not be neutral here. I try to be neutral, but I'm definitely in favor. I think that it is going to provide a lot more power to developers, right? And I think that's the important thing. And it also, as a software engineer myself, right? I love the fact, right, that we've abstracted out to essentially what software engineers understand, which are computers, right? Blockchains they can be a little bit complicated. They work a little bit differently than other systems people are familiar with, but every software engineer knows how a computer works, hopefully, right? And so being able to just say, all right, well, Polkadot, it's an ubiquitous computer. You want to write some code, you put it on the computer and you can ensure that it runs. And yes, there are some knobs you can dial and, different ways you can deploy it and different ways you can, pay for the time needed to execute it. But really, again, if I can just sort of summarize everything we've talked about, we're making Polkadot into something like a decentralized version of the laptop that I'm talking to you on this now, right? That we're just making this like basic idea of a computer and creating a trustless decentralized version of it and allowing any software engineer to build what they want to build on it and see it deployed to the world.
Wow, absolutely fascinating. Bill, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're going to leave links to everything that we've spoken about in this video down in the description for people to check out. Where can people find you, Bill? We'll leave links to your socials. Is there anywhere you want to direct people in specific?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at Bill Laboon, all one word. Actually, if you just do a search for Bill Laboon, I have a very unusual last name, and so you probably find me. I write a lot on Polkaverse, and my GitHub, Laboon. So just look up Bill Laboon, and you'll find me somewhere.
Bill, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. It's great to touch base with you, and it's really been a privilege to explore Polkadot in its current, potential future state and everything in between. So thank you very much, Bill.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you.